A Nation on Edge. Racial Intimidation in Post-Election America. On November 7, 2024, as the dust began to settle after a contentious presidential election, a new wave of fear gripped America. This was not the fear of economic downturns or geopolitical threats but something far more intimate and insidious: a resurgence of racial intimidation targeting communities of color. Reports began flooding in from across the country, messages filled with hate and venom sent to individuals who had done nothing but exist as themselves. For many Black Americans, these weren't just words on a screen. They were reminders of a dark history that never fully loosened its grip. The election had been one of the most polarizing in recent memory. A reflection of a nation increasingly divided along political, cultural, and racial lines. The debates were fierce, the rhetoric sharper than ever, with race an unspoken thread weaving through the discourse. And while the election results delivered a verdict on the nation's political future, they also ignited an undercurrent of resentment among those unwilling to accept the inevitable march of progress. The racial intimidation that followed was not random. Many of the messages came in the form of anonymous texts, emails, or social media posts, targeting Black Americans specifically. Some were overt threats: "We're coming for you." Others took a more insidious tone, cloaked in mocking or taunting language: "This country will never be yours." Recipients ranged from high-profile public figures to everyday citizens, their lives disrupted by the stark reminder that racism was alive, thriving, and emboldened. The messages weren't confined to one region or one demographic of sender. They came from across the nation, cutting through the anonymity of the internet to strike fear into those who received them. What connected these acts was not just their hatred but their timing. The election had become a flashpoint, a moment where progress collided with resistance, and the fallout was both immediate and deeply personal. For many older Americans, these events felt hauntingly familiar. A painful echo of the civil rights era. It was not long ago, in the arc of history, that people of color faced violence for trying to vote, for asserting their rights, for simply existing in spaces deemed off-limits to them. The intimidation tactics of 2024, while cloaked in modern technology, bore the same intent as the Jim Crow laws and lynch mobs of the past: to instill fear and suppress voices. But where those tactics once relied on physical violence, today's version hides behind screens and keyboards. The anonymity of digital platforms gives hate a new weapon, one that can strike without immediate consequences. Yet, the impact is no less devastating. Victims spoke of sleepless nights, of constantly looking over their shoulders, of questioning whether their communities were safe. The reports soon reached the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, which announced it was launching an investigation into the wave of racial intimidation. But for many Black Americans, the announcement brought little comfort. Trust in law enforcement has long been fraught, especially when it comes to addressing issues of racial violence. Critics pointed out that while the FBI's involvement was necessary, it was also reactive, a bandage on a wound that had been festering for decades. Civil rights organizations, meanwhile, rallied to support the victims and call for accountability. The NAACP issued a statement condemning the attacks, while grassroots groups organized community forums to discuss safety and resilience. Leaders across the spectrum emphasized the importance of reporting these incidents, even as some victims hesitated, fearing further retaliation or the futility of action. The events of November 7 didn't exist in isolation. They were part of a larger pattern that had been building for years. A reflection of a nation grappling with its identity. The backlash against racial progress, whether in the form of voter suppression laws, hate crimes, or online harassment, revealed the deep divides that remained. For every step forward, it seemed, there was a pushback, a reminder that progress was neither linear nor guaranteed. What made these incidents particularly chilling was the way they exposed the contradictions of modern America. Here was a country that prided itself on being a beacon of democracy, yet its elections became a trigger for racial animosity. Here was a nation that celebrated its diversity, yet its citizens of color continued to face hostility simply for existing. The messages, hateful as they were not just attacks on individuals but on the very idea of an inclusive America. For older Americans, the events of 2024 may have felt like a bitter validation of lessons learned long ago. They had seen this cycle before, The hope of progress met with the sting of backlash. The promise of equality undermined by the persistence of prejudice. For many, it was a reminder that the fight for civil rights was never truly over. That each generation must confront the shadows of racism in its own way. But there was also resilience. Communities of color, especially Black Americans, responded not with defeat but with determination. Churches, long a backbone of Black resilience, held vigils and discussions. Activists amplified their calls for accountability and justice. And ordinary citizens found ways to support one another, creating networks of solidarity in the face of hate. The story of November 7, 2024, is not just a story of racial intimidation. It is a reflection of America's ongoing struggle to reconcile its ideals with its realities. It is a reminder that the promises of equality and justice remain aspirational for many, not lived experiences. And it is a call to action for individuals, communities, and institutions to confront the forces that seek to divide and oppress. As the FBI continues its investigation, and as the nation grapples with the aftermath of the election, the question remains: what kind of country does America want to be? The answer lies not in the hateful messages of a few but in the collective response of the many. It lies in the willingness to listen, to learn, and to act. For those who lived through the civil rights struggles of the 20th century, the events of 2024 are a painful reminder of how far we still have to go. But they are also a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to give up on the promise of a better America. And in that resilience, there is hope not just for survival, but for progress, for healing, and for justice.